Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild map-making guide, the Tome of Cartography, designed by Arturo Garcia for Dungeons & Dragons. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe. And Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, and Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto. Thank you all very much for your support. Maps. Maps are a thing in D&D, a big thing. You can play Theater of the Mind. If you can do that, my hat's off to you and your group. I cannot. I need my maps. I primarily play in Roll20, which is all maps, so we're used to having that visual guide. But also means I'm not used to making physical maps, which I know is obviously a big thing for playing, I'll say regular D&D, because I think we play regular D&D in Roll20, but you know, making those laminate battle maps that you actually can move figures on or tokens or what have you. I am not an artist. I am as far from an artist as you can get, so I'm kind of thankful that I do not have to make my own maps unless it's to like drag and drop tokens on a battlefield, which works out well for me and my group. But I can see why people would definitely want to have some map making guides. That being said, this one is a bit of a disaster, and it's never my intention to be cruel or mean in my reviews. That's not useful to anybody. I always try to strive for critical analysis and obviously provide constructive feedback on reviews, whether I like them or don't like them. I always try to find, things I like or things I don't like, just to, there's very few 5-star, very few 1-star, I guess I'll say that. But this one has some major problems in it, and we'll go through that. It's about 40 pages long, maybe even more than that, 30 pages long, sorry. And it doesn't need to be nearly that long. It's got a lot of grammatical errors, just really easy stuff too, like your, when they're supposed to say you are, that kind of just elementary school level stuff. If you're going to sell a product on the DM's Guild, and it's fine to have errors. Typos aren't really a thing because the word processor and all that will catch whatever little red squiggle lines that'll catch that shit. But so it's the grammatical stuff, the stuff that you wouldn't catch where you use the wrong word in a place, and that's okay to have one or two of those in a professional product. You've probably read a book where you found a grammatical error, and that happens. Everybody's human, it happens. But if I'm finding like half a dozen in 20 or 30 pages, then that's a real problem, and it tells me that you did not quite even give it a once-over, let alone give it to other people to edit and read. And that needs to happen if you're going to sell a product in a professional capacity. So that's really kind of inexcusable. The font is not good here. You've got this kind of just standard weird cursive style font over here. Not really cursive at all. It's just kind of whatever font this is, which is fine to include that as like a forward. But then this is all plain font over here. This looks like Times New Roman or something, and it's weird to complain about font, but it does happen occasionally. Like it comes up where the font is just distractingly plain, and that has been a complaint on a few of the products that I have seen. Not everything has to be the Scaly Sans or whatever the D&D font is, but just something that makes it look better. Makes it flow better, because that is a big part of the presentation of your product. The first 3 chapters of this are basically like kind of an introduction to why you need maps in D&D, which that's fine, it goes on for too long. And then it's like how to make a battle map, which includes going to the print store. It's literally a map of the print shop company. Taking a map there and letting them print it off, and of course it includes like a battle map that you can print off at the back of this book, which is just a standard hex grid map. All of that seems super obvious. Like, yeah, that is the way you would do it. If you don't want to just buy one from the comic book store, you could absolutely just print off, go to the print company and just print one off and then have them laminate it. Like that seems real obvious for everybody to do. Even if you're not an artist, like you can go to any print store, Office Depot, Office Space, whatever those are, and have them print it off. That works perfectly fine. And then the tools needed section, again, Yeah, you need a ruler to draw a map. You need dry erase markers if you're going to do laminated battle maps, which you should, so you can reuse them. You wipe them and draw it. Oh, again, I'm not an artist. I don't even use the physical maps, and all of this seems painfully obvious that, like, of course you would do this. This is not some kind of secret, like, guidebook thing. It just feels like no shit. Like, yeah, you're using pencils, you're using markers, using erasers, you're using rulers. I don't know. This part's a little bit more useful. It lists kind of the programs you can use, which GIMP is a great program. I've used it. I use it to make my header for Crafting Annihilation and Tomb of Annihilation, just to put those things together. It's just basically just a free open source Photoshop, which is fantastic. But you don't really need to be said much more about that. Just listing programs is fine, I guess, although there's probably way too much here. Everybody knows about Microsoft Paint. That's again not something that's a big insider tip. Paper pages are included at the end of this product, which, again, it's not that hard to just find a hexagon map page or square map page online and print that off. Settlement pages, that's fine. Also not necessary to have. Important NPC lists, you don't need these kind of fancy sheets. I'm not complaining about it. It's always fine to get these, but they don't really have anything to do with the actual map making part of this guide. So now we finally get to chapter 4, and now we finally get to something interesting. So we are, however many pages in. The way this is done with chapters is kind of odd, though, because you can see here each chapter is just this one page. So there's like 9 chapters, but the whole thing does not need to be 9 chapters long for a 20-some page product. But I like the breakdown here a little bit in terms of, you would use the hex grid map to make kind of an overland, fantasy map that you would see like at the front of a fantasy novel. And obviously a settlement map is usually gridless, but might have some kind of a map scaling to it. Just kind of an example of how to draw that. And these are, useful to have. And you've got a surface map, which I believe is just a cutaway kind of like 2D version of the map, which gives you a nice kind of overview. And then the actual classic top-down square dungeon map. So that's great. Types of maps, examples of drawings. There is a little bit of useful information here, such as I found it really useful, like, how big are houses, and thus how big should they be on a map that's about 5-foot scale. This one says about 4 to 6 5 feet squares. Most towns and cities are made up of 4 houses block and about 10 or 20 blocks max, and cities scale up from that. Like, that's useful information for me to process. I want more of that paragraph throughout here, and less of like these kind of examples, which are really rambling. Here's an example of an egregious grammatical error. You are asked by the king to meet him at the royal castle, not the possessive your. Like, there's another example where it's straight is S-T-R-A-I-T, where obviously it should have been S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T. It's just, there's a lot of little missing possessive S's. Just a lot of grammatical errors, and as a writer, that's going to drive, and an editor, that's going to drive me absolutely bananas crazy. And again, I can accept a few in every single product I'd see. I usually catch 1 or 2, and that's fine. But if I'm really seeing a lot of it, then I'm going to red flag that shit every time. And like, look, you needed to go over this one more time, and you need to have like 2 or 3 other people go over it, because a lot of times you'll read something and you'll just never catch it, so you need somebody else to go over it. Moving on, Chapter 8 is how to actually draw like a physical battle map, how to draw little scenes on the map, I guess. So trees and forests, river ponds is the Bob Ross kind of moment, like, hey, we draw our happy lake and all that. Again, it's nice information, but it's not really like... this is kind of like blog post stuff, like you would just find online and somebody just writes a nice little guide. This doesn't really feel like it's really important information that we needed to sell a product for. It seems pretty obvious on how to draw a little tree. I mean, it's still good shorthand, and this is how to draw like an abstract version. So if you're really drawing like a battle map and you're quickly, drawing things on there, like, it's nice to have, but I could have probably figured out how to make, a mountain range and a road and a forest and that kind of stuff. I don't want to complain too much, because I do like this. This is the kind of section that I've expected more of, rather than, all those first 3 chapters about including rulers and things, which I just completely glossed over because it's basically useless. This is at least a little bit better, and it probably should have frankly started with this section here about just how to quickly draw different material, which is way more useful, frankly. Room sizes, map keys are kind of nice to have, the different elements of a map. What I was really hoping that this one would include would have been the actual comparing the ways to make a map based on like real world maps. So like for cartography, which is the art of drawing a map, how to create your own world map, for example. So I would have really liked to see like make sure that rivers flow in a way that makes sense. So they flow up to down, and they always flow into another body of water, for example, or a swamp. How tributaries work, where mountain ranges are found, the way regions can border each other with different kind of biomes. Like that's the kind of stuff that I thought would have been included here, and none of that is here. This is all just the technical stuff of how to draw like physical maps and things. I would have really liked to see more in-depth thinking, and there are guides to this that I've seen, and it's usually looking at maps of our planet Earth, and then you transpose that onto whatever fantasy world you're creating, because most of those worlds are at least partially based on the way our world works. But just like different hints and ideas and examples of how to create these maps based on the way that actual regions and geography work in the real world. And none of that is here. This is just all just how to draw, a forest using green squiggles and all that. And none of that seems like particularly useful or helpful information that you would get just beyond like either just obvious guesses or a pretty easy to look at blog post, essentially. Chapter 9 probably has the single most useful chapter here, which is what I also was expecting more of. Again, if you're going to go that route of like this is just how to draw the physical maps, this one at least has a step-by-step guide using the first step is just the houses, and then you add the the lakes and the fields, and then you actually add the roads and the paths. This is using an example of the settlement map from earlier, which was a weird part where it's like more on settlement maps in chapter 16. Like, why didn't you just include all that together? Like, the organization is very, very scattered. But this is a great chapter, and this is a good example of what I wanted more of if you're going to do just this. You could have slashed this whole thing using about a third of the information included here, slashed the price down, and just included like kind of these bits, and then give me an example of this exactly with each of the other chapters that you had. So give me an example of building this with the overland, what are they called, the region map, and give me an example of creating this with the dungeon map. The layers that you create and the actual steps that you take. Like that's at least useful for somebody that is completely art illiterate. At least give me a good like beginner starter's guide on how to draw these things, and I think this does a pretty good job of it. The first thing I do is draw every building. I've drawn 77 buildings in total and put them about 2 centimeters apart. How to create like a scale, and then I draw this is wildlife, but this is the basically the trees and the fields and the lakes, all those kind of the natural markers, and then you draw in the roads and the borders, and that looks great, and that's a great example of how to draw an actual gridless battle map. I would have liked to see this used for all the other sections, including like the dungeon map and everything else. But more than that, I would have liked to see like the fact that settlements are always near fresh water, and those kind of examples. Like even though obviously settlements and dungeons and everything can vary, so much, and you can always take everything with a grain of salt because we're in a fantasy world that we're talking about. But just the reason behind things, and not just the mechanical translation of it. I would have liked to see some examples, and even better, include examples of more like ready to go examples. So include like just a bunch of maps. That would be the most amazing thing. I could forgive a lot of things in here if you just included a lot of like usable maps that people could immediately use, of ones that the designer has drawn based using their skills. That would have been really helpful. Obviously it is designed to help other people, teach a man to fish, that whole kind of thing. But still, give me a bunch of fish, as a starter pack would have been really nice to have. And unfortunately, the rest of this is just not great either. This part is really weird. So we had earlier examples of how to use GIMP, how to use Paint, different digital programs to make maps, which is fine, and that's something that needs to be mentioned. But this whole section, and to be fair, the author does even state, if you want to use this program for other things, it would best be noted there are a dozen tutorials or dozens of tutorials on many video streaming websites like YouTube. So, and that's obviously true, and it makes this look extremely archaic, like this is a 1998 technical manual, because you just never ever see anybody break down how to use digital programs, because nobody reads that shit anymore. You use a YouTube. Like anybody anybody is going to just bring this up on YouTube. And the author does state that, the fact that that's in YouTube, but I just don't see the fact that we need to spend, what is this, like 8 pages on literally like user guides on how to use GIMP. And GIMP's a great program. It is, especially for people that don't know Photoshop. It can be very overwhelming the way the layers work and transparency and all these things. I had to go through and watch a lot of videos on how to use GIMP because I did not know, I'm not very well versed in any kind of Photoshop or art skills at all. I just don't know how useful this is or how necessary it is. I think you could have just mentioned the fact that here's GIMP and maybe even give some like URLs to like here's some examples of how to I don't think you need to spend all this time actually going through and making a guide, because I don't know anybody that would actually follow this guide rather than just bring up YouTube and watch a video. Like, it's just going to be so much easier, and watching video tutorials to use computer programs is just so ubiquitous now that I don't really think you need any of this information in here. It's fine that we mentioned it, that's a path to use, but I don't think you need any of this to have in there. So all in all, it's a really weird. How it is 40 pages? I guess it's 40 pages plus the maps at the end. Yeah, it's just, this thing should have been about half as long, if that. And it should have expanded on what it did well, which is the middle section here, which is the how to draw the physical battle maps, which is, I don't think, super useful, but still somewhat helpful. The actual like step-by-step drawing instructions here in Chapter 9 are good. And then this part, the just example structures, I would have liked to see a lot more of this, and this section expanded. And you could have, I think, skipped all the computer program stuff, and you could have nuked the entire first 3 chapters of the like how to use erasers and rulers and take your shit to the print shop. Like, none of that. You gotta have some respect for your audience for that. Look at it. Why do I need this book? Well, technically, you may not really need this book due to the advancement in computers and the internet's vast library. Pro tip: don't ever put a partial sentence in your DM's Guild product that says you may not actually need this product. That you need to sell your shit. Like, even if you need to have full confidence in your product, and you need to be the one, you're going to be the biggest proponent of your product and your material. Don't wishy-washy that stuff. Like, you may technically not need this book. Don't say that. Even if it's true, you don't say that. Like, come on, you gotta have some confidence in your work. Definitely take that out there. So yeah, there's some problems in here. There's a few good bits, but overall, it's just kind of a mess of grammatical errors. The font is pretty nasty. The pictures are fine. And if the designer actually drew all these themselves, that's actually pretty solid for drawing all these pictures. But there's so much information you really don't need here, or you would already have, that I just can't really see myself recommending this product. So quick pros and cons for the Tome of Cartography. Pros: it does have helpful tips on how to draw battle maps, including map keys and scaling. That stuff is nice to have. And the step-by-step drawing instructions for making a gridless settlement map are nice, which is that one Chapter 9 section that I wish it would have been a lot more of that. That part is at least good. Cons: numerous grammatical errors, the plain font. The first 3 chapters are basically just superfluous and rambling. Most of the drawing tips are just painfully obvious, like use a ruler, like, yeah. And then the final couple chapters on how to use GIMP and Paint and all the other art programs just feels really archaic and unnecessary to really break it down step by step on how to use like layers and all that. You do not need to write a GIMP technical manual in your Tome of Cartography DM's Guild product. Final verdict: despite being about 40 pages long, the Tome of Cartography doesn't offer much more than a few tips on drawing battle maps and a few resources and tools that you can employ. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.